Thank you for joining us in the Copy Room, where you get to listen in on thoughtful, vulnerable, and honest conversations among educators who are as fiercely devoted to this profession as you are. My aim is to serve you well, nourishing your teacher's soul so that you can move through your week with just a bit more to offer our kids than you had before you listened. You're working so hard to take care of our kids. My intention for this podcast, ultimately, is to take care of you. I want to thank Dirt Path Publishing, a small independent publishing house dedicated to publishing works for social good, for continuing to support the production of this podcast. With editing and coaching services for writers, these folks know how to have the hard conversations in service to your best work, and they know how to do it with love. Dirt Path Publishing is also proud to announce the release of my new book, Nothing's Missing, A Year of Reckoning, Release, and Remembering Who I Am, written for anyone struggling to release the burdens of perfectionism and the tyranny of shoulds. For more information, go to NicoleLuciani.com. In the meantime, and always, welcome to the Copy Room. Sam Bradbury and I go back to 1986, when he was 16 and I was 14, and we were high school sweethearts. He had a tender heart, a soul who longed to plant roots, and a home of origin who didn't prepare him for either. Nowhere around him could he find a force to stabilize him long enough to grow into himself, and so he blew with the wind from one family to another, one job to another, one life to another. He was safe and loved in my home and in the home of a few other good friends. But it wasn't until he became a teacher that he found a reason to grow roots. And it wasn't until he found his family that he knew where to plant them. Sam came to teaching as a second career guy. In this episode, you'll hear why he left a successful career in retail to become a special education teacher, and how his seeds were planted decades before by his teachers who believed in him when very few others did. Sam and I parted as sweethearts after he graduated from high school, but we've remained family ever since. He is among the greatest gifts in my life, and I'm so happy to get to share him with you. My mom took him in as her own when we were kids, teaching me in no uncertain terms that there was no such thing as other people's children. He's moved through his career as a teacher with that same ethic, knowing for sure that we belong to one another. Welcome to my very good friend, Sam Bradbury, who I love and have invited on the show for this season because I know he's got some teachers in his past who've inspired him. Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really grateful that you invited me into your fold here and to talk about just teachers that have inspired us and just be part of a conversation with you. I always enjoy that.
Thank you. Well, we wouldn't have gotten much further without you. So a little backstory for the listeners. Sam and I have known each other for 36 years, at least 35. We met when I was 13, and I'm going to be 49. So there you go. I am 49. I'm not going to be 49. So we were high school sweethearts, and then we went our separate ways, and somehow ended up both back in the classroom. And so let's start with a little backstory, because your relationship with school, I think, maybe has been mixed. And I'm curious about how your experience with school has informed, first of all, you wanting to be in the profession, and secondly, the way you kind of think about teaching, just in general. So tell us about how you got here. What was your experience in school like?
Well, first I have to say, I wasn't sure before I came on how we were going to handle our past. But I'm glad that you mentioned that because, it was something that I was thinking about. And so, we have known each other for a long time. And I hope folks know that I really I consider you family.
Mm-hmm.
and very fortunate to, be able to circle back around and have you in my life. But anyways, I'm glad you
Mm.
handled that.
Yes.
um, so, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I was thinking about, just growing up, um, for better or for worse. I mean, I had kind of a single mom, with, in bad relationships, and school was always just really kind of an escape for me.
Mm.
I was really fortunate that my mom put us in a great school. We used an address for my cousin, a fantastic elementary school in Oakland, Sequoia Elementary School, founded in 1926. I can
Mm.
still see that engraved on the big pillars outside. Um, and, it was, I think through that experience with my teachers, I found that um, my relationships with them really were strong. And I think a lot of those folks there, especially Mrs. Gertler, my third grade teacher, who was very like vociferous, just a crazy reader. And she just
Mhm.
really kind of instilled this love of books for me. But the other piece I was thinking about her is just her holding me accountable. Um,
Mm.
and I remember distinctly a book report puppet show that I was supposed to do for Elmer and the Dragon. And true to form, I procrastinated, and I was kind of lying to my mom and saying I didn't have anything to do. And Mrs. Gertler called because she was concerned that I wasn't there, and
Mm.
she blew up the whole plan. And so, um, um, but the thing about Mrs. Gertler, I remember her for things like that, and her giving me an extra chance, and also her taking a personal interest in me. I remember speaking with her after school and her checking in with me. She was a little, I don't know what she saw, if she was a little bit concerned, or, I also went to school, had, it was a mostly white school, and I come from a biracial family. And so
Mhm.
that was another layer. I think that's right when my sister started kindergarten. And I don't know which,
Mm.
back then I didn't really have the wherewithal to know what she was getting at. But as I look back, I think it was just one of her ways to check in with me to make sure that I was okay. And she was always,
Mhm.
asking me questions about how I was. Um, and when I also think my fourth grade teacher, Mr. Egan, who's very similar, and he just kind of saw that I was looking for something, and it just, I was kind of bored with school, even in fourth grade, and um,
Mhm.
he had these like spelling baseball competitions, and I was a pretty good speller, and so I would kind of clean up, and I couldn't do anything on the athletic field, but I could definitely do something with spelling. Um, but he also, he put me in charge of like the AV equipment. So I was the
Mm.
film strip person. And
Mhm.
he took the time out to talk to me and check in with me. He also suffered from Parkinson's, and
Mm.
he had a tremor. And I remember, asking him about that, and him being very honest and being able to have that back and forth dialogue with those teachers. I think really
Mm.
kind of, again, in hindsight, set the tone of this idea that there was someone there looking out for me,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know? And
Mhm.
I feel like I didn't have that so much because I was kind of in charge of my sisters, and we were, busing across town, and I was always in charge of all the decision making. And so I think that I really found some solace in like these two individuals for sure. Um,
Mm.
and fast forward from there, like I don't know, like 10 years, and I remember bumping into Mrs. Gertler at like a Long's drugstore or something.
Oh
um
my gosh.
yeah, and it was crazy. I recognized her immediately. But here I was,
Mhm.
this is like 10, maybe even 15 years later, and I certainly didn't look the same. But
Mhm.
she recognized me, like in the store,
Mm.
and she said Sam Morris, or whatever last name I was using at the time. I don't remember. Um, but she, but the interesting thing was, is she asked how I was doing, and she also asked about
Mhm.
my best friend Vicky that I grew up with, and I just thought
Mm.
that's a real connection. To identify
Mhm.
me as a person was, really made my day. But also the fact that she had this
Mhm.
other piece of my life that she remembered, and she asked and she checked in on it. And so I,
So great.
as a teacher, I this for myself, I'm always trying to build connections with students to let them know that there's someone there, right? And there's someone checking in on them. There's a
Mm.
concern, you know, and there's not this, there's a built-in power differential. And what I try to do is I don't know, I think I consciously try to like lower the, just kind of even that out. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so from there, so a great experience in elementary school. And then I moved in with my grandparents out in San Lorenzo, and I went to Edendale Middle School.
Mhm.
Um, had a couple
Mhm.
great teachers. That was a really quick stint. I think that I was really just trying to adjust to being kind of
Mm.
moved away from, my family. Um, I mean, I think of Mr. Miller, who was just great times, and again, someone who took a personal interest in me at Edendale.
Mhm.
And then I got to San Lorenzo High School, and lots of great teachers there. I mean, definitely a standout is Pam Wilson, who
Mm.
is on many students' list, and I'm connected to a
Mhm.
lot of alumni from San Lorenzo. And Mrs. Wilson is a beloved member of our community, and
Yes.
like before, she was someone who was honest with me, and I felt
Mhm.
really took the time to like build trust, and she could tell me anything and I could tell her anything. And it
Mhm.
wasn't, we weren't equals, and I knew that, but I almost felt like we were definitely, we were more equal than, I don't know, than the built-in, again, power differential there. I don't know. I just
Yeah, yeah. She was our very first guest, Pam Wilson. Season 1, episode 1, because that's how important she was to my career. But I think the same thing as you as a student, you knew she was the boss, but she didn't like lord her authority over. She just was real. She was a real grown-up human that you could trust because you knew she was real, right?
absolutely. And even when I think of my students, I mean, today, that's that's really the entree. It's really about being honest
Mhm.
with them and being vulnerable and
Mhm.
taking the risk for yourself. And I feel
Mhm.
like Mrs. Wilson was very much that. And like you said, she just was a real person. And I felt
Mhm.
like I could tell her anything, and I trusted her. I think that was the
Mhm.
biggest win. And I don't know, the biggest part of really kind of, as I think back, of kind of forming who I want to be as a teacher. And I think
Mhm.
Mrs. Wilson, in addition to like Mr. Egan and Mrs. Gertler, these are folks that I thought were real people. I didn't think
Yeah.
they lived at the school. Like students think that we live at
Mhm.
school, but they were there. I remember, I remember Mrs. Wilson calling me at home one night and getting a phone call, um, and I panicked a little bit. I was like, "Oh my God, what is
Yeah.
she calling me for?" And she called me to ask me about a teacher's edition of a book that she had that was taken from her desk. And so,
Uh-oh.
and so it's so funny, to this day I've never really asked her about that, and I still wonder, and I
Mhm.
could just ask her if she really thought that I took it, or if she thought I had
Yeah.
the inside track on who could have taken it. And you know what? And the sad thing to say, and I guess funny thing to say, is it could have been either one. I don't know.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
because she knew who I think I was a pretty good kid, but I could certainly be, sneaky, and just I could be a teenager. Um,
Sure. Sure.
but the fact that she called me directly, right? She
Mhm.
didn't talk to my grandparents. She called me and spoke to me on the phone and asked me about it, and she framed it in a way of, maybe I've known somebody that could have, taken it. So I'm gonna
That's
rest it on that rather than her thinking I
yeah.
actually took it. But for the record, I didn't. I had nothing to do with it. I had no idea about it. So I didn't do that. I would never do that. Um,
Yeah.
but going back to the original thing, we were saying is, I think that, these people really, again, inform who I am today as a teacher, really,
Mhm.
about being honest and really just kind of
Mhm.
showing who I am to the students so they can feel
Mhm.
safe. Because I don't
Mhm.
know their backstories. I don't know what they're doing at home. I don't know what traumas are
Mhm.
going on, or what they've been
Mhm.
carrying, or what they're experiencing right now. And so I think, um, all that put together has really kind of, again, like I said, informed my teaching and hopefully made me a better teacher. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, I'm a career changer, and, I had a pretty successful career in retail, and people ask me why I became a teacher. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I think part of it's like being the eldest sibling kind of had something to do with it. Always like being,
Mm.
taking care of my sisters. I think the experiences in school for sure. And I think my experience in college with running an after school tutoring program for a community that I grew up in, um,
Yeah.
it was something for me to give back. And I've always felt that in my bones is like trying to help other than help others. I can't talk. Um,
Mhm.
and, teaching for me almost just happened kind of naturally. Once I figured
Mm.
out
Mhm.
I needed to feed my soul. And I think
Mm.
selfishly, you know, I'll admit, I mean, I get something from this profession and
Sure.
from this
Sure.
commitment. And I feel like when I'm not doing it, I'm just not myself. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah. Tell me, what I heard in what you were saying when you were describing your growing up is this the notion of the warm demander, right? You were loved, you were seen as a human, you were spoken to as if you were smart because you were. You were given the respect and the trust of them being honest with you. And all three of those people held you to high standards because you could do it. And that feels like an important piece that it's not just that you were loved and nurtured, but that it part of the way you were loved and nurtured was demanding that you rise to your own excellence.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean,
Mhm.
I busted my butt for those teachers. And that puppet
Mhm.
show was like the best puppet show ever the next day. And I remember staying up all night feverishly like writing that out. And
Mhm.
feeling and you mentioned that it's this idea of having someone feel proud of you,
Mm.
right? And so it's connected to the idea of like the high expectations for sure. Like I wanted
Mhm.
Mrs. Gurley to be proud of me. I wanted Mr. Egan to be proud of me. I wanted Mrs. Wilson to be proud of me. So
Mm.
yeah, it is that. And so I think in addition to seeing who I was, um, I never felt like they were like lowering the bar for me at all. You know,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
I will say that my junior year, I went off to independent studies and I kind of went rogue on the whole school thing.
Mhm.
And that's a complete blur because there was really no one
Mm.
there. I mean, I was checking with the
Yeah.
teacher once a week. And so
Yeah.
I often think about that time and what that year that was kind of removed, you know, I don't
Mhm.
know how that could have impacted me. I ended up coming back my senior year, but it never really got traction. And I had other external things going on in my life
Right.
at that point, is coming out, my own
Mhm.
identity issues,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so I think that I think I got all P's when I graduated, and because I just wasn't checked in because I didn't have anybody.
Yeah.
And so it really
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
highlights the need to have someone there to kind of hold you accountable to, see you as a person.
Yeah. I wonder we're going to if we can go off script just for a second because I think about how people perceived you as a sophomore in high school. You were outgoing and gregarious and you loved school and you were a little mischievous and scrappy and fun, and then all of a sudden you fell off the radar junior year. And I understood it because I was with you the whole time watching and experiencing some of that pain with you. I wonder what you would have your teachers know about what was behind all that gregarious exterior that maybe they could have helped, or maybe not. Maybe there was nothing they could have done, and you really needed to go that journey on your own.
It's funny because I was thinking about this too, just in the car, um, especially like with it coming out, because that was a big thing. And in
Yeah.
hindsight, I can look back and know that I've always been who I am.
Mhm.
But I didn't really have anybody to connect to on that. And while I trusted
Mm.
teachers, I felt alone in
Mm.
those moments. And I think that my sophomore year, from for all intents and purposes, I'm sure outside looking in, or looking at that, yeah, I was connected. I was class president. I was very engaged. Um, but I think it was a distraction for myself, right? And
Keep
so
yourself busy.
totally my coping mechanism was that, and
Mhm.
some people drink and some people, whatever. And I think that was,
Mhm.
that was a piece of it. Um, and and I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer to the question. The answer to that question is about having to do it on your own. Part of
Mm.
me says yes, and part of me was just such a different time to be able to talk about like sexual orientation, and because
Oh
I think
God, yeah.
that
Mhm.
was just a big thing, and fitting into all the classic categories of students.
Mhm.
The Breakfast Club, another ode to Pam Wilson, of
Mhm.
kind of where you fit in, and I never really fit
Yeah.
into any of those categories. I fit, I don't know. It just I wish there was somebody there that could actually have been a role model to let me
Mm.
know that you could be who you were.
Mhm.
But that just wasn't
Mhm.
available. I mean, I had guesses even about teachers that possibly,
Sure.
but nothing really concrete. And I think that if I had somebody to kind of really open up to, I don't know, who knows.
Are you intentional about really being clear about your identity with your students and really being that person to students who maybe, like in your situation, are kind of questioning or wondering or knowing but not wanting to know? Like, do you lean in on any of that, your own experience, and not having that to provide it for others now?
Absolutely. I think in the beginning when I first started teaching, I did it was more of my own don't ask, don't tell.
Mhm.
I didn't lie if someone asked me,
Mhm.
but what students can ask you? I mean, and there's
Right.
a
Yeah.
couple there I mean there have been a couple for sure. And I love them for it. And those are hilarious stories. But I think that um as I've gotten more comfortable, because you're still carrying around all of that societal pressure of not coming out and
Yeah.
not I never had a role model for that, right? So when I became a
No,
teacher, I
yeah.
was like, do I say it or what? Or, so I went through,
Mhm.
I kind of just, like I said, did a don't ask, don't tell. And then, I wish there was this moment that I could remember. Um, and actually, I do remember when I switched schools after 6 years at one high school in New York City. I went to a transfer high school, Westside High School, and this was a school of you know of misfits. That's kind of they were thought
Mhm.
of students who were overaged, undercredited, failing out of more traditional high schools. And so I felt like I found my tribe, and
Mm.
I needed to be me. And I remember having a
Mhm.
family group advisory. And we did an activity called turning points, and many teachers know what this is these moments in your life that your trajectory changes and you share these really important pieces of your life. And I remember sitting there and I was making out turning points, and it was really kind of G-rated, and I thought, and I sit
Mhm.
there and I thought, I can't do this. Like,
Mhm.
I'm BSing these kids. This is dumb.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I went for it, and I talked about coming out. I also talked about um, being diagnosed with HIV, and I really kind of bared my soul. And there was a couple, I had a couple students in there that were, they're pretty tough, and they're part
Mhm.
of gangs in New York, and they had their own issues going on, and that was a little. I got to say, I didn't know how that would play out, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
homophobia and those kind of things, but they all stood up and clapped.
Oh God.
I mean, after all that time of carrying that around, and all you had to
Yeah.
do is just kind of expose yourself and have that moment. And I cried, of course, and
Yeah.
got teary eyed.
Of course.
And it's so funny because that was my first year there, and the administrators were always wondering why are your advisory kids always in your office at lunch? Because now they were all coming to hang
Mhm.
out with me. And so from then
Mhm.
on, I knew that I was gonna be very proactive about that, announcing who I was,
Mhm.
mentioning Arthur, and my home and those
Mhm.
kind of things, and be hopefully a beacon for other students. Um,
Yeah.
and I continue that today. I mean, I have the office with the LGBTQIA flag on the
Mhm.
window, front and center. I have
Mhm.
students that come to me
Mhm.
that aren't technically mine to come talk to me about
Mhm.
issues. So I think that piece of visibility is so important,
Mhm.
to them, and
Mhm.
hopefully to kind of remove that, try to like minimize that stress, or that extra stress that they're carrying with them, that they can have someone to go to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it reminds me too of when you think about Mrs. Wilson, and the first thing and most important thing you say is that she was a real person, right? That she allowed herself to be seen. And even if kids aren't gay, or even if they aren't trans, or even if they aren't, whatever, they know you to be someone who is authentically you, which gives them permission to be authentically them. And I think particularly for our young men in our schools and our boys, they need to see men who are not boxed in and afraid. And I'm so grateful for our kids that they have you for that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I think about this a lot, especially what we've done to our young men. Certainly
Yeah,
young women, and and the
of course.
just the enduring sexism that we deal with all the time.
Hmm.
But also what we've done to our young men, that,
Hmm.
we've raised them to not be sissies, or,
Hmm.
to act like a man, and, all those
Hmm.
things, which I think have really damaged our young men. And
Hmm.
I agree with you. I think it's important for our young men to see other men being vulnerable, and,
Yeah.
people are there to help them and to let them see there's a different way. And I really do think the younger generation's got a better grasp on this than we certainly had, and things definitely are changing. But I think it's
Hmm.
not just by accident. I think it's folks out there, and adults out there, and people who care, that are actually exposing themselves, and
Yeah.
being there for them.
Well, I just know from my own experience raising two sons who adore you, and they adore you not only because I do, but because you are just this light of humanity that allows them to be who they are without judgment. And I'm so grateful that they know you, and we don't even get to see you very much, but um, I just feel like that's one of your callings. I feel like that's part of the reason that you're here. And I'm just so grateful for it. I'm getting a little weepy myself.
I'm just I'm glad that I can it doesn't take any effort for me just to be me, and to
Yeah.
really see that, and to see it helping others. I had another student, I just mentioned this one story really quick. A student at West Side High School, and he was very homophobic, and I remember another dean coming to me and saying, he doesn't really want to talk to you, right? Because he was always in the hallway, and that is a
Mm.
big sign of what's wrong. you know,
Yeah.
I mean, as we all know. And I was the dean, patrol, on hallway duty.
Hmm.
I'd always try to approach him, and he would just turn around and walk away. And so I got this message from somebody he was connected with, like he didn't want to talk to you. And I said, well, what's the problem? And so what he alluded to, this other teacher, it was about my sexual orientation. And so this was a barrier for this student and I. And I really,
Hmm.
really wanted to know more about him. Like I really wanted to help him, because I knew something was wrong. Um,
Hmm.
and so what I did is I never gave up on him. I didn't
Hmm.
care. I backed off a little bit, but I was always, I changed my messaging to him. It was like, how can I help you? Is there anything I can help you with? How are you doing? And I just, checked in, and then I found out he needed to pass a math exam for his GED. And so I started to offer that. I said, listen, if you ever need help with the math with the GED, let me know. And finally, towards the end of the year, and we had almost gone through an entire year, I think it was in May, he came to me into my office and introduced himself and said, you said you could help with math. And I said, absolutely, 100%. And so we sat down that day, and I think every day for like 2 weeks after school that he stayed with me. He ended up passing, which was great that he passed. But this idea that, more importantly, that he actually sat there with me, and he had grown from the moment, from earlier when he was just avoiding me in the hallway. Because I was out, and he knew that, but that was a hurdle for him to get over.
So what I was thinking was, so often we take things personally when a kid something happens, right? You could have taken that personally and gotten angry. Like, how dare you treat me that way or blah blah blah. How come that's not your default? What is that, conscious, or is that just who you are as a human?
I think that's just who I am as a human. I mean, there's been moments. Listen, I'd be lying to say I haven't had those moments. But
Right.
it's typically not who I am. I'm typically I typically want to know about the students, and I know in
Mhm.
order to do that, if and I tell my students all the time is I lead with kindness, and what I find is when you lead with that, then you typically get that in return. I would
Mhm.
stop every morning and stop every classroom and be like, "Hey, good morning, everybody," and they're like, "Why are you always so happy?" And that, but I would share them with that. I would share that with them
Mhm.
about that's just kind of who I want to be, and who I strive to be. So I think in those moments, when I have any difficulty with a student, um, that I like to think that I normally kind of default to this idea of like, how can I help you, rather than
Mhm.
the negative, like don't do that, or I kind of remove that from my
Mhm.
vocabulary, like. But there's sometimes where I have to like make sure that my head is set, to that feature, because it's not 100% all the time. There are
Of
still
course, you're a human being.
there are still those students that can just really, they can have a lot going on. They could get under your skin a little bit.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. What's the most important thing you feel like a student or a member of their family has taught you? Can you identify one or two?
Um, you know, yeah, it all connects to what we're talking about. It's just this idea um, of asking questions of your students and finding out who they are. And I think of one of my students who, my first year of teaching, and he was all over the place. I mean, he was just out of his chair, out in the hallway, and I just wanted to wring his neck. um, Not literally,
No,
but
no.
it was really trying, and I didn't know what to do. I knew that he had some special needs for sure, and we were dealing with some ADHD and things like that, and I was still kind of learning. I was in school.
Mhm.
I was actually going to grad school while I was teaching, for the
Mhm.
New York City Teaching Fellows, so I didn't know everything. I Which I still
Mhm.
don't know, but um, but he was very taxing on the classroom, on
Mm,
myself. And then I noticed one day that he came in and he sat in the back. And this was out of character for him, but I had paid attention to him because I knew his moves. He sat in the back and he
mhm,
had his head down, and he was like almost falling asleep. And so I went and sat next to him. And I was at two teachers in the classroom, so I had the luxury of being able to kind of go off to the side with him. And I sat with
mhm,
him and I said, I asked him, what's going on? Like, this is, you seem like you're upset or tired, or. And then he said that he was on this new medication, and that
mm,
it made him really tired, and he didn't like it, and his mom made him take it today. And this was like connected to something I had reached out to mom to say, hey, there's some things going on. Long story
mhm,
short, he wrote me a note that night from his mom's email address, and
mhm,
apologized for, in his words, for always acting like a clown, um,
mm,
and that he has ADHD and he has a hard time staying focused and he needs something to do, but he hears everything that I say, and
mm,
he wanted me to know that
mhm,
although it manifests in him walking around the classroom and everything else, that he pays attention to everything I say,
mm,
and which was true because he always aced his quizzes, and so he was paying attention the whole time. His body just needed to do something else to regulate itself. And so
yeah,
I ended up having the cleanest classroom in the whole school, because I'd say, fine, here. And, he likes to clean, and he wanted to clean, and he
mhm,
would clean around the room and do other things. um, but it was in that moment that I knew that I had to really kind of clue into my students and ask more questions of them, about
mm,
what they needed,
mhm,
what they thought they needed, rather than
mhm,
me assume that I knew what they needed. And I think that
mhm,
he taught me that, and he and I are still friends. And he helped.
Mm.
He was one of the students that came and helped us move just this year, and so we have a lifelong friendship. He and I. And this is a student
Sweet.
that no one else, all the teachers in the teachers, room be like, oh my goodness, and you have this kid,
Mhm.
and just so that was one thing that was really important for me to
Yeah.
learn. Um,
Yeah.
How do you feel like teaching has strengthened you as a human in other parts of your life outside of school?
I, I, I'd like to think that it's helped me to like strengthen my relationships with others, to be a
Mhm.
better listener.
Mm.
Um, it's reinforced the empathy that I have for others. Um, and so those same things that I bring to my students, or I like to think that I bring to my students, I try to bring to my students. I you know I try to bring those into my life as well, of being a good
Mhm.
listener, of asking folks how they are, but
Mhm.
more importantly, not just asking, but really kind of listening and trying to find those connections, um,
Mhm.
with others, because as um, we all connect, we're all connected, and so we just have to find out what those
Yeah.
are. And I think once we do that, it builds a strong, solid relationship. And I think whether it be in the classroom or at work, but also in your personal life, to really kind of hear others is really, really key.
Mm, that's lovely. So, these last three questions we ask every guest on the show. And so we'll start with my pals, the Indigo Girls, and the song Hammer and a Nail. I don't know if you know that song, but the quote that I love out of it is if you have a care in the world, you have a gift to give. And so I'm wondering, and I think I can kind of guess based on the conversation we've had, but I'd love to hear you articulate it. When you think about schools, people like to say that, oh, if you just did X, or if we just had more money, or if we just blah, 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 then everything would be fine. And really, we know how complex and nuanced the issue of schooling is for our kids and for us as teachers. And we all really need to bring our unique gift and like a puzzle piece and put it down on the table and sort it all out and figure out how it goes together to really intentionally create a community of learners and nurture that community of learners. So I'm wondering what you think your piece is. What do you care about so much that it's become your gift that you can lay down on the table and really contribute to your community?
Well, I mean, yeah, we've been talking about it a lot, and it's really, you know, I'm really, committed to this idea of community, and seeing others and being seen, right? And this idea that,
Mhm.
um, it's really critical to lead again with kindness, but also model it. And I think
Mhm.
that that's the piece that's important. And we talked about earlier about being, maybe even being like out, just those
Mhm.
that piece of just being authentic and being yourself, and modeling what that looks like for our students is, I think, is a key to kind of, again, building a community. um, and I also think this idea of accountability, especially when it comes to like
Mhm.
disciplinary issues, and really, rather
Mhm.
than writing students off, of really giving them the opportunity to kind of reflect on who they are. Right, that goes it's actually goes hand in hand with this idea of asking how they're doing or what they need, because usually that's it's a symptom of something else. And I
Mhm.
think this
Mhm.
idea of, um, in our disciplinary piece, is really kind of holding the students accountable for owning their piece in something, owning their piece in harm to a
Mm.
community, but also the being able for them to share the reasons behind their actions, or what they think, is
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
is really important. And a lot of students are just, in a lot of schools, they're just written off, suspended, whatever, but there's really no piece of reconnecting them back.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
think
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
I think that in addition to this idea of really kind of being visible and checking in with students, they go kind of hand in hand, because we don't know their
Mhm.
stories, and I think their stories are important. So
Yeah.
I guess to sum it up is, I want to know their stories.
Mm. Mhm. In service to helping them be good, the best learners they can be.
To be the best learners, to be the best humans, to
Yeah.
to see their gifts,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
highlight them for them, to
Mhm.
praise them when you hear it, because when you start to hear their
Mhm.
stories, you see some of the massive hurdles that they've had to overcome, and
Mhm.
sometimes I don't think that they've heard enough about being able to achieve something over, getting over those hurdles.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like then you have maybe three pieces in that being that are all connected. Like there's an authenticity piece, there's a listening piece, and there's a connector piece that you want to reconnect them to the community and to the school so that they don't get lost, so that they have a home, so that they can learn how to thrive. And knowing your story as I do, those are the three things you needed as a student, and maybe the three things you got from those teachers that you mentioned.
Well, that's a nice way to circle back around. You know too much about me.
Mhm.
That's the problem
I know, I know,
here.
it's tricky.
but it,
Okay, so go ahead.
no, but it's true, right? These
Yeah.
things don't go away, And I was just talking about this
Mhm.
with Arthur the other day, and this idea that these traumas don't leave us,
Mhm.
right? They inform who we become, right? And we can
Mhm.
use that to help others with those same issues, or not.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So we have a copy room conversations playlist. What's the song you'd put on it for your? Do you have one?
So, I thought about this question, too. And it's funny. I don't listen to music on my way to work, or
Hmm.
it's really, it's my downtime, my reflection time. And so
Mhm.
I might have news radio on, now that I have a car for the first time in 15 years. But it really, sometimes I put my AirPods in just to kind of let the world know that I just need to be cut off from them. So on the subway, I'd have them in,
Yes.
but there's no music. It was just my time to kind of reflect about my day. And I'm not sure if this is
Mhm.
because I'm not alone. There's not a lot of alone
Mhm.
time, and that's when I can really clear my thoughts out. And so I think that my pump up really is to kind of think about all the things that one I need to get done, but also to think about the students who I'm eager to see, or check in with, and
Mhm.
I start to list through the students that I need to meet that day. So no music.
Mhm.
All right, quick tip takeaway. We're in the copy room. I'm punching holes. You're at the machine. You finish up. You're about to go. What are you going to leave us? And it can be light or serious or funny or practical. What's the takeaway that we can have from you as you exit the copy room?
Two things. One, ask students how they are,
Mhm.
open with that, and how can I help you.
Mhm.
The other thing is to make sure that you take time for you,
Mhm.
for yourself, to heal, to repair yourself, and to
Mhm.
try your best to kind of keep those spheres separate as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because as you know, teaching does not end when the bell rings.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm still personally struggling with that, of like putting those divides between my personal life and my work life. um,
Mhm.
and I think that's really, really key, because if we don't if we don't heal ourselves and like rejuvenate ourselves and restore ourselves, then um, it's a little more difficult to help others that way.
For sure. For sure. Thank you. Thank you for being our guest and joining us here. I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you. I don't know. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I can be here, and I just want to say that you're one of those people that I always saw teaching, and you actually let me visit one of your classrooms, I think, when you were at San Lorenzo, and I just remember sitting there thinking, wow, look at her gift, and sharing with all these students. And I think that also made a mark on me, um, of wanting to really kind of, I don't know, be that person, and or be in service to the students in that way. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. That's so sweet. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. My hope is it gave you some respite from your worries and some time to remember that we belong to one another, and that there's no such thing as other people's children. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe. These 3 things make a big difference in our ability to connect teachers to one another in service to each other and our kids. We also want to thank Dirt Path Publishing for partnering with us on this podcast. The mission of Dirt Path is to publish work for social good. They are proud to include Copy Room Conversations under that banner. For more information on coaching and editing services, or if you have a book you want to publish that you know will serve the greater good, visit dirtpathpublishing.com.